owed £250,000 to friends and family. Eventually the car and the house went. I was actually homeless for a little while. I struggled with my mental health a lot, just looking for a place to shower and brush my teeth. Attitude I go to work with every day is that I've got nothing to lose now. That I've achieved everything I think would have been expected of me. And now everything is a bonus to my family, the people around me. And now we're at just about 150 stores in development over the next 5 years. So just about anywhere that anybody's watching this in the UK, you'll see a Doner Shack popping up pretty soon.
Welcome to the Bay HQ podcast, where we aim to inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you're watching on Apple or Spotify, make sure you give us a 5-star review. Today we have with us Sanj Sanghera, who's the founder of Doner Shack and Haus Hospitality. They recently won the top fast casual restaurant in the UK, awarded by the likes of HSBC and the British Franchise Association. How are you doing today, Sanj?
I'm good, thank you for having me on.
So you've recently moved to London, and you're obviously based in Scotland beforehand, so people might pick up on your accent there.
Yes, I think they might.
So we had lunch before this, obviously not at Doner Shack, unfortunately, but it's great to get to know you and your story. But can you share for the audience, when you were growing up, did you ever believe you'd be doing what you're doing today?
I always had a lot of ambition growing up. I originally wanted to be a professional basketball player, and for a young Asian 5'11" guy, that's usually not top career choice, but I got very good at it, and I went over to America and I was trying out for different colleges, but that level of ambition was part of my makeup from day one.
And where did that ambition come from?
I'm not sure. I think it had a lot to do with family. My granddad's story, who came to London back in the 60s. He was 12 years old when he left the village and went to Lahore, trying to seek a better life for his family, and his first job was cleaning people's shoes. And one of the people's shoes that he used to clean was one of the higher ranking officers of the British Army, who eventually gave him a job in the bar, and he went on to control the alcohol supply in and out of Lahore. So yeah, that level of ambition has been with us for quite a while.
And you mentioned as well, because you had the furniture store part of the family as well, so your dad and your granddad both have that ambition and drive in the UK too.
Yeah, my dad came to the UK back in 1967, worked in foundries in the Midlands, where we were born in Coventry, and he realised that there wasn't much of a future there for him, and he came up with this idea that we were going to serve Indian food to Scottish people, and that was a great formula, because curry and pints go down pretty well, which we found. So yeah, I think there was always this attitude of going where the opportunity was, and I've kind of followed in their footsteps.
So going from trying to become a professional basketball player to now running a franchise restaurant company, how did that happen? Did you start a business before that? Where did this interest come from?
The mindset was, as a young and very ambitious kid, I had started imagining myself making millions of dollars playing basketball. So I'd already started spending the money, and then I just needed a different vehicle to be able to allow me to have that lifestyle. So going over to America and seeing how, at the time used to say how the other half live, but just seeing the level of ambition and that there was no ceiling for them and what they could achieve in their life, and people telling you that if you believe it enough and you're willing to work hard for it, that you can achieve whatever you like. So yeah, I never wanted to live a life where I had limits on myself. I always set my own limits, and it wasn't what other people would expect of me. So it was probably the biggest driving force to having huge ambition is just taking that ceiling away.
I think it's one of the big things that we're trying to get through as well, because I see it because I've done a lot of work with American entrepreneurs and just seen the way they think, and it's just, we're going to go for this, we're going to try and become a $1 billion company, we're going to do that. You don't hear that from people here as much, and they just put these limits on themselves. And like I said, it's not that you're different to that person or that person's different. You can all do it. It's just some people think they can do it and actually work hard for that.
Yeah, I mean, British society in general is very reserved. And, you have a mix of, especially from an Asian background, within the Punjabi culture, I know that it wasn't something that you do. You don't go out and you show off about what you want to achieve. You have to, Sernima was what my dad used to always say to me. It was just keep your head down. I think in America it was very, very different. In America there was, you're celebrated for failing in your first business, because now you've learned your way and you've got your war marks and you're ready to actually go out in the world and do something bigger. Whereas here, failure was always thought of as, well, that's you. Just you get back in your little box and behave like you're supposed to. Going over to America and especially with social media, and you see the way that they live, and you're much more intertwined with their way of thinking and their life. It helps to think that, we shouldn't live within these confines that we're shown as kids.
I think it's even happened to me in the past where, for example, if I've talked about how much money I made for some of the different things, then your family's always like, oh, you shouldn't brag.
Yeah.
But then because people like from our communities don't do that, it's that fine line, right? It's how do you inspire? Because if people don't know how much money you're making, or don't realize that's possible, or don't realize how big some people are dreaming, they think, like you said, oh, I've just got to stay in my box.
Yeah.
But people going out there like you and doing it and like dreaming big and going hard and seeing what they can do and doing those dreams bigger, it just helps everybody else.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things that, through my journey that I realised is that you don't need to play down your success to be humble. Your journey usually dictates how much humility and humbleness that you carry throughout your life. And for me, my journey started off very tough. I was 16 years old, had all these ambitions of playing basketball. And I remember at the time thinking, what else am I good at? Because I was rubbish at school. I wasn't good at school at all. My sister and my brother were the great academics. Both went on to do degrees at university and, graduated, made the family proud. And their photos hang proudly in my mum and dad's living room. I'm now probably at the time where I should get my photo up there, actually. But getting to 16 years old and then getting into my dad's restaurant and thinking, well, this is a stepping stone to something that I could grow. And always having that sort of inner ambition without being vocal about it, about I'm going to take over one day, I'm going to open up more restaurants and I'm going to try and be experimental and give our customers new ideas and new things because they've been doing the same things for the last 20 years. And that's where the process started for me. And I remember my first day in the restaurant and I walked in with my chef's jacket on and my dad looked at me and he kind of sniggered and said, see, you're not going to be doing any cooking, you're washing the dishes. And about 6 months into it, I asked my dad, I said, Dad, look, can I get a break now? Can I go and learn how to cook? And he said, see, just for asking me, you're going to go back and do that for another 6 months. So that's where I got my grounding. Nothing was handed to me on a plate. I had to work really, really hard for it. If I told you my salary at the time, you'd probably fall off your chair laughing. But it was, I had to do it for the benefit of the family and, helping my dad out. So all the reasoning was right, but I wasn't really fulfilling what I wanted to do out of my journey. And as I got better at what I'd done, I ended up becoming the executive chef of the family business. We opened a flagship restaurant in Glasgow. It was a celebrated restaurant. We won a lot of awards there, and I got to do some TV work with the likes of Robbie Coltrane before he was filming Harry Potter. The ambition at that point was that I was going to maybe work towards a Michelin star. And I just looked at that path and I thought, there's a chance that I might not actually get this Michelin star and I'm going to be back at square one. And then I'm going to feel like a failure. So maybe I should just think about a different career path. Then the ambition came that I wanted to open my own restaurant. And I'd done that in 2007, 2008. And it lasted 6 months. And it was 6 months. And, I thought at that time, after 12 years of experience, that just about everything I was going to touch was going to turn to gold. And I found myself in a position where I was in mountains of debt. I owed £250,000 to friends and family. The mortgage was in arrears. The car payments were late. Eventually the car and the house went and the bailiffs turned up and took them away. I lost my business and I was actually homeless for a little while. But I managed in that period to get a lease for a Pizza Hut restaurant out in Ayr, which is just south of Glasgow. And the idea in my head was like, okay, I can kind of keep the dream alive. This Pizza Hut is already equipped with the cold room, the freezer room, the counters there. I just have to put a new sign up and I could start cooking and making some money. Plus I'll just live there at night time and won't tell anybody about it. Like the ideas that when you hit failure, the ideas that come up in your head are just crazy. Like I think back to it now and I think, what was I doing? But it was also, there was this huge blockade where the pride of growing up in a family that had been successful and hadn't taken too many risks and always played the safe card. And because of that, they'd had a very consistent lifestyle. And I'm going out and I'm just wanting to do everything, and I wanted to do it now and I wanted to do it quickly. And from that, I kind of realised, I'm going to have to be much more careful with the decisions that I make and how I'm going to rebuild this business. But it was a place for me to keep my head down. It was a place to get away from all the pressure of all the money that I owed at the time. And it was a place where I could keep my dream alive. And I started working at that restaurant, and about 6 months in, we had really bad water damage. A mains water pipe had burst on the main road. We put in a claim to the insurance company for almost £80,000 with the loss assessors. They came back and said that you're getting paid out £14,000 because we were underinsured. So for a second time, I had an opportunity to quit and say, right, I'm just forget this. It's too difficult. I'm going to go back and start working with my family. And, every time I came to that crossroads, there was just this huge desire to continue with the dream, because I just knew that I believed in myself. I knew I'd made mistakes, but I believed in myself so much that I thought, no, I'm going to try and get this restaurant back up and running. So I actually started watching YouTube videos on how to build walls, how to plaster, how to lay bricks, how to raise floors and build toilets and tile and all sorts of stuff. And learning that off YouTube. And before that, I think back in the 80s, I'd built an MFI wardrobe once with my mum and dad, and that was about it. That was the height of my construction experience. But I rebuilt this restaurant and it took me 3 months, and I'd done it with that £14,000. It almost showed me a different path to, I can grow my business without having to rely on huge loans and without having to borrow money and without having to, go to contractors who are going to make hundreds of thousands of pounds out of my project that I'm going to be paying back for the next 10 years. So there was a spark of inspiration that, hey, I can build this myself. I'm just going to go and build bigger restaurants every time I get an opportunity. And I built that one up, got a review a few weeks later, which poised it as the best small Indian restaurant in Scotland. We got a 27 out of 30 in the local tabloid, but it was a very well-respected tabloid and a well-read column. And it beat my dad's restaurant, which was really... Yeah. And at that moment, I remember taking the snippets from the magazine. I went to the local newsagents and I picked up snippets of the magazine, and I sent it to everybody I owed money to. And it was almost like just I really appreciate that you're not chasing me every day, but this is what I'm working on. And it's actually worked, because the people that cooked his food that day weren't from an Asian background. They weren't skilled Asian chefs. And the reason that my first business failed was because I had a very experimental idea of creating a scalable Indian food concept. And the idea was that we removed the chef, but we put in systems in place that would allow us to cook fresh food. And being an executive chef, the food had to be better or as good as what I could create when I was standing there being creative with a pan, but it needed to be systemized. And that system was patented and registered and all sorts of stuff. And, it worked really, really well. But by the time my street food concepts were actually being proven, and I'd been through this journey of failure and repaying debts and, getting this business up and running and rebuilding the restaurant, I got to a stage where I'm looking at the market and thinking the same opportunity that I bought into in 2006, 2007 no longer exists in 2011, because Dishon were coming up, Mowgli were out there doing stuff, Mughlai were doing stuff, and I'm thinking I'm now going to be the fourth best Indian restaurant if I scale it. I'm not going to be number one. And I remember at that point, I started thinking about what else could we do. And this journey at this point had taken me to the northeast of England, because there was an opportunity to get a lease for another restaurant. Trying to get into main cities when you're a small restaurant in Ayr is not that easy. You have to prove a covenant. You have to give large deposits. You don't have as much financing ability as maybe some of the bigger players. So we were always looking, how can we just take another small step? And the next step was to create a restaurant that was alongside other mainstream brands. And we ended up in the northeast for about 3 years. And again, it was with the same concept, which was Papa Dom's at the time. And I remember coming home one day and I said, I spend 14 hours a day in the restaurant. I've not had a day off in 3 years. The restaurant is, just getting by, and I need to do something else. And I said, should we do pizza or burgers, to my partner? And she said, there's no opportunity left there. What are you thinking about? And I said, well, what about kebabs? No one's done anything with kebabs. And she started laughing and said, you can forget your Michelin star if you want to do kebabs. And I said, all right. And it was
a challenge. Yeah, challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. And it was a few hours later that we discovered Berlin kebabs. And the next day we actually closed the restaurant for the first time in 3 years. And we flew to Berlin and done nothing but drink beer and eat kebabs for 3 days. And came back with this fixated idea that we were going to create really high quality kebab restaurants in the UK.
Before we go on to the kebab side, I just need to unpack some of the stuff you just said, because you've said so much great stuff there. I want to make sure I remember everything before you go on. So I think one of the interesting things as well is kind of society-wise about how your brother and your sister are on the mantelpiece with their university degrees, but you're not there yet. But at the same time, look at what you've achieved, having not done a degree. And I think what that shows a lot of people, and even what you said at the beginning too, about how your salary at the beginning was basically negligible, right? And you worked as a dishwasher. And it's people listening right now, not everybody's been to a fancy university. Not everybody gets opportunity. And it's not even, some people might have the opportunity, but it's just not aligned with them. And then sometimes they think, oh, like I can't be successful because they're comparing themselves to other people in their family or other people in the community. When there's people like you have that same background, had to do those hard jobs that aren't sexy, right? Nobody wants to tell everybody, oh yeah, I was a dishwasher, right? People like to hide that kind of thing. But it's all getting somewhere, right? And by you doing those jobs have to be done. And that helps the entire restaurant run, right? If there wasn't somebody doing that, the restaurant would collapse. So I think it's really important to kind of emphasize that point of you came from that position where you didn't go to university. You didn't start off with a high flying job, but you worked your way up anyway. And it's really interesting too about how you said that you're working with the family business for a long time, but then you want to step out and do your own thing still. And I think a lot of people, it's one of those different struggles a lot of Asians have in some ways, is that if you come from a family that does have their business that's doing well, then the natural thing is, oh, you're going to take over. But then you're continuing on that legacy of somebody else's ideas and you don't get the chance to do something for yourself. And I can imagine like what would happen once you had that first restaurant that failed and was out of business, the amount of pressure you would have got from people around you to just, oh, why don't you just go back to the family business? Why are you trying to do your own thing for, like, you tried and you failed, okay, you had your go and stop now. How did you deal with that kind of feedback you were getting then?
I didn't deal with it well. Mentally, I struggled with my mental health a lot, to the point where I actually needed to get some help and direction from experts. And, I was at the time, I was very, very embarrassed about it, having to go and see a psychologist to try and overcome the depression of being a failure, sticking out like a sore thumb, especially in a small community like Glasgow, that when someone does have a failure, it's broadcast through the community very, very quickly. And I wish that I had the strength of mind that I have now, because going back, I would have dealt with a lot of things very differently. A lot of the pressure came from my brother, and my brother's a real sort of perfectionist. One, he's very, very clever. He's my big brother, so he always feels like he's got a right to say something to me. And he was always giving me direction, good and bad. Sometimes his advice was, right, enough's enough. Just leave it, go back to working in the restaurant. Other times it was, your systems are too experimental. Go back to hire a chef, go back to having a tandoor and having a normal cooking system. And once you establish your name, then you can start trying to systemize it. But for me, the mindset was, it's all or nothing. I don't have this, this middle safe ground, because the safe ground for me represented something I didn't want in my life. It was like, you play it safe, you're very risk averse, you don't want to really step outside the mark. And I thought, nobody that's ever at that stage in their life where they're playing everything safe is ever rewarded for it. And I think to be rewarded for it on a big scale, I had to take risks. I was just willing to take much higher risks than I think at the time a lot of people in my family would accept. And that's one of the reasons why I had to distance myself from them. And now in hindsight, everything is completely different. My relationship with my brother is absolutely fantastic. And I think finally, he's got over that point where he actually respects me as a business person. So yeah, I think the long-term thinking is what helped me get through it. It was always about the long-term goal, and I always knew the relationships would repair themselves in the long term. And if you're thinking short-term, then it's very difficult to overcome them kind of challenges.
So it's interesting, because I think a lot of us sometimes have that relationship with our siblings as well, where especially if our siblings are doing something different, or like they're doing something very academic, and then sometimes you feel like you need to go down the same path as them. And a lot of the time it is sad in some communities, right? In some families where there is this rivalry between the siblings. But a lot of the time, at least for me, it's we might be doing different things, but we have each other's backs and we're trying to look out for each other. And it might just be that how they think they're looking out for you might be different to what you want. And it's just that different mentality and working that out. Yep. And you mentioned as well, when you were homeless and trying to deal with that, did people know about that? Did your family know about that? Did you hide that from people?
I completely hid it. I hid everything about my mental health. I hid everything about the financial struggles as much as I could. I don't think any of them realised the extent of the debt that I had accumulated. And to them, it was like, well, he owes me 10,000, and someone else would say, well, he owes me 10,000. And it wasn't until much later that I started actually paying everyone back, and they all realised that there's quite a lot of people in this pool that need paid back. So yeah, there was a lot of shame. A huge amount of shame, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to get out of Glasgow and move to another town. Is just I needed to escape, one, get my energy back and be in the right mental frame of mind, but also to keep that dream alive. I knew how much hard work it was going to take, and to be able to do that hard work efficiently, I had to have peace of mind that someone wasn't going to turn up asking for money. So yeah, that's a big challenge.
It does help when you know that that's not going to happen, right? And even looking at that, you said how the way you dealt with it wasn't always necessarily healthy, but you did get help in the end. And I imagine there's some people listening right now who may be going through the same thing, where their business is failing, they're in a dark place. What would you maybe do differently if you had to go back there now? Or what have you learned about becoming more resilient today that you could potentially help those people with?
The one thing that I was always scared to do was reach out and talk to somebody about, what I was going through and getting advice from people. I also thought at the time, you have to take into context that my mentors were first generation Punjabis, mostly. They'd all came from India, worked really hard, and generally the reason they came over here was because there wasn't enough land or enough opportunities for them in India. So they came over here and they've worked very hard, and the level of success that they had attained, and especially within Glasgow, was really high. And they thought that they had conquered the world. And that's quite right, because they were very, very successful in their own right. For where they had came from, their level of success, they had lived all their dreams. I always felt like that wasn't the right audience for me to speak to, because I was like, I'm already trying to achieve what they've achieved in their life, but I want to go beyond that. So when I'm asking them for advice, what I'm constantly hearing is, stop, slow down, don't think too big. You're trying to reach for the stars. Why can't you just be happy with a little bit? I think now, for anyone who was going through that and would realise that there is people that have been through that journey, there are people that you can reach out to, there's people that you can talk to for advice, there are people that maybe help you understand your situation better and give you an opportunity to make the best of that situation, rather than it just being something that you're having to deal with on your own and you make a lot of mistakes. And I think that is the difference now, if anybody was going through it now, to what it was back then. Back then I was expected to make mistakes again and again and again until I got it right. Now, you make one mistake, you can go to people, you can get help, and you can get direction. So I hope people would reach out, because it's a dark place to be in when you've got so much riding on it.
It's what we talked about as well, with the difference between the mentality here, especially within our community, versus, say, America. Like I said, in America, you fail, okay, cool, like you've got a lesson, you carry on. And what's interesting, I think, about your journey compared to some other people I've talked to is that when you had that failure, it went all the way down to homelessness, right? So I say to people, like, make sure you have a safety net, so you have that ability to go hard at something, and then if you fail, you've at least got that security blanket. At
the time, I'm putting myself into the frame of mind that I was in when I was, just looking for a place to shower and brush my teeth. And it was only a few days before I managed to get into the restaurant and start rebuilding it. But that's a pretty harrowing experience, and it's crazy to think about it. But I was thinking at the time that this will make a great story one day. And that's actually the mentality that I had, that even when I was in that position, that I was still looking at the what's to come. I still believed in myself, and it's the one thing that I've never, ever, ever let go of, is how much I believed in my own ability to do something. If someone says to me, you can't do this, I will absolutely prove them wrong. And I've been challenged with some pretty crazy things in the past, and I've proven people wrong. So yeah, it was, for me, the safety net was just my own mentality.
And how do you think that strength of mind's now helped with? So you had, I guess, everything. When you look at with the kebab business, you had the strength of the mind, the experience in the restaurant business, the failure to learn from as well. And do you think all of those different factors then allowed you to scale the kebab side much quicker? And what happened there?
I think the attitude I go to work with every day is that I've got nothing to lose now, that I've achieved everything I think would have been expected of me. And now everything is a bonus to my family, the people around me. And now I go back to Glasgow and I feel like there's almost a little bit of celebration around what I'm doing. And that feels really, really good. So for me, it's, like that whole situation of the pressures of the family, etc. It doesn't exist anymore. So I'm really, really comfortable with how I go about my career and how I get up every day, and that attitude to just maybe exceed more and create more.
And so we started the story earlier where you went to Berlin, you had your kebab and beer binge, and then you came back. What happened after that? Where did the actual business start?
There was a period of assessment. We looked at how we could launch this business, and we looked at what risks and what sort of market factors existed that would maybe make it difficult for us to do so. And I think the first thing is that my concept was to open it as a takeaway and delivery restaurant, much in line with the sort of Domino's business model. And I thought, like, we could do deliveries and we could do X, Y, and Z. And then I thought, well, it doesn't matter how good the quality of my meat or how many artisan bakers create our bread every day. If you're doing it from a takeaway format, people are just going to think of it as another takeaway kebab shop. And then I started thinking that we've got to do this on a much bigger scale. We're going to go to the lengths of importing meat and bread from Germany, from some of the best manufacturers and butchers and bakers in that country. And then we're going to bring it over here and put it together in a format that nobody's ever seen before. So let's do it on a bigger scale. And we came up with the idea for a restaurant called Haus in Glasgow, which was a full service restaurant, 5,000 square feet, almost 130 covers. And the bar became a focal point of that. So we done 6 different German lagers and pilsners. We done lots of cocktails, and we really made the whole idea of eating a kebab in a restaurant. And we brought that to the forefront of how people might perceive this product. And we changed people's perceptions by doing it that way. And people would come in and they'd say, what kind of food do you serve? And we say, you just walked into a restaurant that's called House, and they're still asking, what kind of food do you serve? And we used to get that all the time. And it was because they just couldn't understand that they're serving doner kebab like this. And then you would go through the process of educating them and telling them that, look, it's not your regular doner kebab. These are really high quality meats, essentially like eating slices of steak that's in an artisan baked bread that's made by 5th generation Turkish bakers, and it comes over from Germany. And in fact, we started importing so much bread that it actually made financial sense for us to buy the recipe from them and open our own bakery in Glasgow, which was part of that process. So then it was all our bread is baked locally in our own bakery. And yeah, that process started really making people think about that product in a totally different light.
My stomach is now rumbling. As you're talking, it's like, oh no, I'm getting hungry now. We just had lunch before this as well, but now I'm hungry again. And so the first restaurant was in Glasgow, right? Yeah. And then where was the idea to then expand this further?
The ambition was still there from this entire journey, that I wanted to scale something, and I wanted to do it on a level that could take me international. I started looking at that business model and I thought, well, look, good franchisees in the market won't spend anywhere up to £1.5 million to fit out a 5,000 square foot restaurant. And then there's all challenges in terms of the operating system itself, in that you have alcohol and cocktails and skill that's required. And good franchise operations only work when there's a level of de-skilling involved in it. So I thought, well, how can we systemize, again, going back to that idea of systemizing kitchens where my background is, how can we systemize this kitchen to make it something that's scalable? So we took all the inner workings of Doner House, and on the back of that we created Doner Shack, and that was our franchise model. So it was stripped back, but it was a little bit more flexible. There was robotics introduced for the first time. We have robotic kebab cutting machines. You press a button and they come down and cut the meat by themselves, which is a great bit of theatre for our customers as well. But we systemized that to the point where we thought, right, now we've got a scalable model. But that was our first one at arm's length. It opened in Leeds in Trinity Kitchen, and it was very, very successful from day one. So that then set up the foundations for a brand that we could start to scale up.
And then, give the audience context here. How much have you scaled up now?
Significant. During the pandemic, we set about, there was 2 paths again that we could have taken. One was, right, we're going to go really heavy on delivery and try and keep our business alive. And the other one was, let's be patient, let's take a step at a time, and let's use this opportunity of all this downtime to catch up with our competitors in the market. Let's put all the groundwork in place so that when we come out of this, we are in a position where we've got really, really strong foundations to grow quickly. And that's one of the mistakes that a lot of franchise brands make. Franchise brands come up with a good concept and then they just go to market straight away without thinking about the consequences. And the consequences is that you have some people that are remortgaging their home. The second generation remortgage their home, buying into a concept because you've told them it's all singing, all dancing and the best thing that's ever came into the market. And then they get involved and then they realise, there's operational systems. I'm not hitting my labour targets. There's a lot of wastage, so I'm not hitting my food cost targets. Now I'm only making 6% EBITDA and I should be making 20%. So this business isn't all it's supposed to be. And what we said is, let's create a financial model for this business. Let's create an operating system that would reduce wastage, reduce labour, etc., put all of that in place, and then when we go to market and sell this, we're selling something that is completely turnkey and is really ready to go to scale. And when our franchisees seen it, it wasn't a selling process. There was no selling involved. It was, we're going to tell you about the system and we're going to tell you about the financial plan. And as soon as we went through that process, we actually now have franchisees that are fighting over territories. And we're at just about 150 stores in development over the next 5 years. So just about anywhere that anybody's watching this in the UK, you'll see a Doner Shack popping up pretty soon.
And one thing we talked about earlier as well is how, for a franchisee model, how important it is that the actual person who's taking on the business is going to make money. And there's a lot of different franchisees where they're trying to, or franchisers, where they're looking at how they can make the most money they can. But then if the businesses don't last, then you're not getting any money from that.
I love this question. I really do, because it's something that I speak about a lot. I think when you look back at franchising in terms of when it had its most success, and it's probably in the early days of quick service restaurants like McDonald's. I remember at the time, even as a young kid, that people would talk about McDonald's, that it was almost like license to print money. And the reason it was so successful is because people were making money. The franchisees that were buying into the concept were making a lot of money. And it was almost like people just had this underlying belief that if you get a McDonald's franchisee, you will be a millionaire in X amount of years. So over the years, other businesses have tried to franchise, but they come in it with perspective of how can we squeeze as much money out of this franchisee as possible? And what we've done is we've just completely reset it. We went back to say, right, we're not going to make any money on the supply chain. We're not going to mark up the meat by a pound. We're not going to mark up the bread by 20%. So that means that the franchisee is making really good gross profit. Second thing is spend the money and invest in the operating system so that it's really, really efficient. So they're not overpaying on labour and they don't have skill that's going to hold them back from growth. And then you look at the overall markup and we say we take a small percentage of that, but if a franchisee is still walking away with between 15 and 20% EBITDA, they've got a great business. And that's the way that we approach that. So when the franchisees in the market found out about, how we were approaching it, there was this almost like a huge collective sigh of relief. Finally, a brand that not only has a great reputation, they are in the early stages of growth, so there's lots of opportunity out there. They are doing all the right things so that in terms of the way that we're looked at, transparent and working for the franchisees' benefit, because we have a value, which is we win when the franchisees win. So you put all of these things together, and that's why there was no sales process. They just couldn't wait to actually sign up for the territories.
I really love that. And it's just, obviously I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, right? And I hear all these different stories, and sometimes you hear stories where people are pretending to be good, right? Whereas you can just tell the way you're saying it is like you really care about it. And like I love that. And everybody listening, like make sure you go to Doner House, Doner Shack, and all the different things, because like I'm like sitting here and I judge, like you hear, like I hear some of your entrepreneurial stories and I can judge them, like you're really believing in what you're saying and it really comes across. And part of that you said about the 150 stores coming in the UK, right? And you've got ambitions to go global, right? So can you tell us about that too?
Yeah, we've been working on a project to get into the USA for about 18 months. If anyone knows what that process is like, it's very litigious. You have to franchise in the US, you have to produce almost 1,000-page document that has to go to the head of every state. So it's not an easy process. There's also things to consider about trademarks, etc., that we had to go through. So that process has been ongoing for about 18 months, and we've just got to the stage now where we're going over to the International Franchise Convention in Las Vegas later on in the year to launch the brand there. We've already had quite a considerable amount of interest through the network of people that we've got to know over there. I think it's just coming up with the right strategy and the right marketing techniques and being very focused on what the Americans would expect from us, from a brand like us, because going over there and being the big dog with the doner kebab, I just don't think they'll buy into that. I think you have to really understand what they're looking for. And McDonald's are probably the best at it. If you think about McDonald's in India, they do a Maharaja burger and all sorts of other stuff. So they make their menu selective to the local audience. And I think we'll have to go through a little bit of that process as well. But we're very, very excited about it. The Americans are talking in numbers that sometimes make my mind boggle a little bit, but that's okay, because as long as they're comfortable with them numbers, then I'm comfortable with them as well. But certainly we've had inquiries from all over the world. We were talking to people in the Middle East, we are talking to people in Asia, and really we're looking at it as a global concept. And I think if you look at all the food types that have existed over the years that have scaled up on a large scale, the main ones being burger and pizza. Now you've got this sort of chicken renaissance, and you've got guys like Wingstop and following on from Nando's success and Slim Chickens. I think doner kebab is going to be probably competing with chicken as being the third biggest food type in the world, and we're at the very forefront of that.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned about the 3 different stages of what you're going to try and do in America, right? And my memory escapes me now, but can you remind us, so first of all, you need people to first know about you, right?
Yes.
And then...
Yeah, we've got a simple philosophy. It's trust, and then when you get them to things, then they'll do business with you. And going through that process means, to get them to like you, they need to understand you. So there's a simple process behind that about how we're going to talk to our consumers and our customers about what we do and what we represent. The second phase is that, they try you and then they see it's a good quality product and the service was good. They start to trust you. And sometimes that takes one outing to your venue. Sometimes it can take 6 or 7. But eventually, once you get to trust you, that's when you create in that ladder of loyalty, if you like, you create raving fans. And in the UK, our customers that we have, I would say a lot of them are raving fans. They're actually promoting our business for us. So to do that in America is a really, really important step to being successful over there.
And we're coming up to the quick fire questions soon. But if somebody else is looking at this model and thinking they've never really thought about franchising before, what advice would you give somebody starting out who wanted to either become a franchisee or a franchiser?
Don't do it. No. I think the main thing is get to as many conferences as possible. Seek as much advice as possible. Don't be shy to pay for professional advice from consultants within the industry, and really make sure you understand how to benefit franchisees and not just benefit yourself, because everybody starts every business journey with, how am I going to benefit from this? That's the underlying question. And usually it's very financially driven. So in franchising, you have to be very conscious that the franchisee needs to make money. If you're a franchisor, that is, and you're thinking about franchising your own brand. But as a franchisee, do your due diligence. Don't go out there and just look at who's big or who's in the ascendancy. Actually look at the business model and look at the financial model and speak to everyone in the industry. Don't just come and speak to us. Go and speak to our competitors. Go and understand what they're saying to you. And then you'll get a better picture of the benefits of one brand over another. And I think that's the main thing is go out and do your due diligence. Be patient enough to go out and get all the information you need to make good decisions.
Yeah, so I've loved this interview so far. We're going to move on to quick fire questions now.
Sure.
So the first one is, who are 3 British Asians that you think people listening now should be following or paying attention to in the business space?
Wow. Okay, that's a tough one. Someone I've got to know really recently comes from a very academic background, Nilesh Parmar, who's a dentist. He's probably not as well known as maybe some of the bigger names that are like on Dragon's Den and so on and so on. But I found Nilesh to be a breath of fresh air to be around, and his way of thinking is...
Was it breath of fresh air because he's a dentist, or was that unrelated?
No pun intended. Yeah, I love that. Just because I think I've lost count of the amount of degrees that he's got. And it's that, when I look at him, I see someone who is really reliable and really smart and goes through everything in a really methodical sort of fashion and doesn't make mistakes. And there's a lot of trust in what he does. And I think Nilesh is a great role model for anyone who's aspiring to do well in especially within the medical profession or in dentistry, but certainly as someone who I would back. Another good mentor that I've got is Shiraz Ramzan, who I've only got to know over the last maybe 4 or 5 months. Shiraz's family own Quiz Clothing. And the story that he told me about how his gran would actually knit the stuff in the house and his granddad would go door to door selling them, to now having, I think they've got 80 shops in the UK, 80 concessions, and they've got international businesses in New York and in the Middle East. He's been a great source of inspiration for me because that story exists all the way from startup, like basic startup, in the Haus living room startup to all the way to an international PLC, and he's been a great source of inspiration for me. And probably number 3 is someone that's never doing it for their own benefit is Ravi Singh from Calside, and just watching his stories online, and he's just willing to give up everything to help other people. It's so inspiring, and that's a level of inspiration that business doesn't get you to. That's a really deep lying sort of inspiration about someone who's just gonna go out to the most dangerous places in the world and just help refugees. And I think I probably relate to Ravi a little bit more because my granddad told me a story that when he escaped Pakistan from during the partition, that all the money that he'd saved over there was supposed to be for his family. He actually ended up using a lot of it to help the Muslims that were stuck in a camp next to his village. So there was that idea of that sort of humanitarian, aid and helping people, and the humility and humbleness to be able to do that. So yeah, Ravi Singh is definitely up there for me.
Yeah, I love that. And we interviewed Ravi Singh recently as well, and it's just incredible in person. In some ways you put him on this pedestal, but then in person he's just so normal. I was like, how can you be so normal after all the stuff you've done?
Yeah.
So that's why I really loved him as well. He wasn't standoffish. He was just so friendly and just joking and busting jokes. Yeah, it was great. Next quick fire question is, what can people listening right now, what can they contact you about if they're looking for help or guidance in some way?
If anyone wants guidance about restaurants in general or about franchising, certainly my 2 areas of expertise. I've been in the industry for more than 25 years now, and I've been through just about every position within the restaurant industry that you can think of. So yeah, and I know how challenging it is, and I know how many people have that dream about opening their own restaurant one day. So yeah, certainly if anyone needs some advice on that, I'm more than happy to help.
And then on the flip side, is there anything that you need help with right now?
If anyone's out there who's ambitious in the restaurant business and they're looking for a career with really good growth prospects, potentially all the way up to owning their own franchise, then get in touch with us, because we're looking for talented people to help us grow, so we can help them grow. Together we can all win. I'm a big believer in winning together, and that's why we set it as part of our values. So yeah, if anyone's out there looking for a career in the restaurant or franchising industry, then get in touch.
Yeah, that's great. And make sure you reach out to Sanj, everybody. And then finally, have you got any final words for the audience before we wrap up?
I think the way that the story is being told today, I think just if there's people out there that are in a position where they're not quite sure about their next step, or people around about them are telling them that you're too ambitious or don't go for it and play the safe card. If you believe in yourself, go out there and do what you need to do. You don't get 2 opportunities at life, and the last thing that you want to do is grow old with regrets. So if you're ambitious and you've got dreams, and go and chase them. Don't be scared of the consequences. Just find ways to overcome the challenges and make a way in life.
Thank you for listening to the Bay HQ podcast today. In our mission to inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asian entrepreneurs, it would mean so much to us if you could subscribe to our channel, leave a review and share this with your friends.